Well, hello and welcome from Piney Forest Baptist Church, located in Andrews, South Carolina, beautiful in the beautiful low country. Certain times of the year, you'll see beautiful fields of cotton, as far as you can see, big, beautiful, tall pine trees. This time of year, in the springtime, you see a lot of cornfields on every road. Also the beautiful rivers around, the Black River, the Mingo, the PD, the Waccamaw, and the Winyon Bay, the Sampit. Every day you see the farmers this time of year, they beginning to plan, they begin to plow and prepare the ground for the corn. They're ready for the corn to produce. And that they kind of got a bulldog mentality. They focus on that. They're in gold, and they start out with the end in mind that the corn would produce. And I want to let's keep that in mind. We want to talk about when the corn produces. That means when God's plans unfold and things come to completion, what you started out for, your plan, your purpose, your dream in your life. I'm going to read from Psalm 105, which is one of the two historical psalms, along with Psalm 78, tells about the overall history of the Old Testament, along with Stephen's speech in Acts 7. It tells a lot about God's people, and mainly about Joseph and Moses. But I want to talk about Joseph, the life of Joseph. In Psalms 105, verse 17, it says, "He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant, whose feet they hurt with feathers, and they laid in irons, until the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him. The king sent and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him Lord of his house, ruler of all his substance, to bind his princes at his pleasure, to teach his senators wisdom. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. And he increased his people greatly, and made them stronger than their enemies." That is talking about Joseph. And it talks about basically the 5 stages of his life, and that he was sold as a slave into the pit. And Joseph, beginning in the book of Genesis, it gives more time to Joseph than any other character, even Abraham, even Isaac, even Jacob. Any other book in Genesis is given to Joseph. And he was the favored son. In Genesis 37, verse 2, I want to turn to that. He was a favored son. Even though he wasn't the first son, he was really 11th in rank out of 12. Him and his brother Benjamin was the last 2, but he was favored. He was favored by his dad, father Jacob, because he was a son of Rachel. He was loved by his father, and he was hated by his half-brothers. And as you know, I'm not going to read all these scriptures, but kind of talking about Joseph. And there are the generation of Jacob in Genesis 37:2. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock of his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the son of Ziphiah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought to his father their evil report. He told about his father about they was doing wrong, and he was rewarded by that. Now Joseph loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. That is a story in itself, and I'm not going to cover. We could talk so much about Joseph, but I want to concentrate on this, and the good Lord put it on my heart and I hope you receive it the way the good Lord give it to me. And when his brethren saw that his father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably about him. Joseph, he was the favored son. His father told him, first of all, to go on a trip. They were shepherds out in the field, and he sent him out to check on his brothers. They seen him coming, the treachery. They planned to kill him, and they threw him in a dry pit. They stripped him of his coat of many colors. They dipped it in goat's blood, and they was going to kill him. But now we see the transaction. They seen a caravan coming, and they was a group going to Egypt, and they sold him for a slave. You know, now we see him the faithful servant. He went to went from the pit, the dry well that they threw him in. They were debating to kill him or not, and now a caravan grew up, came by, and they sold him. Said, we just get rid of him. Well, he went to Potiphar's house. He went from the pit to Potiphar's house, and we see here that he did very well. He couldn't understand what was going on, and that's what we'll talk about. He, even in the pit to the prison and Potiphar's house, he was very faithful. He always focused. We talk about his service. Even at Potiphar's house, he did very well. In 39, 20, and 23, he said, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, and because we see his service there, he's working, and his self-control. His wife wanted to have an affair with him, but Joseph, he was said no. He was a godly man, and yet he suffered over this many days. We see her request, and his refusal brought her revenge. She tore her clothes. She messed up her hair and grabbed his coat robe that he had on when he fled from that. And she was embarrassed, but she told the people, said, look what this slave did. Said he tried to abuse me. So her husband put him into the prison. So he went from the pit to Potiphar's house, now to the prison. And now we see him in the prison. He was the forgotten slave. We see that in 39, 21, and 23. It says, and Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. It's one thing being punished from things you do, but when you're persecuted for doing right in this life, you don't really understand things. And God's plan never did come about to the end. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was a doer of it. He kept even the prison. Everywhere he went, God blessed him because he tried. He kept his focus on God. He never did give up his dream. We see him the favored son. He was a faithful servant. Now he was a forgotten slave. He was just cast into the prison. Once again, it says in chapter 40, verse 14, but he told the butler and the cupbearer there that he had a dream once again, and he knew they was going to get out and go into the in front of the Pharaoh. So he interpreted their dreams, and he told them, and he said, don't forget me in here. In verse 14, it said, but think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention to me and to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing, that they put me in this dungeon. You know, he didn't point fingers. He didn't play the blame game. He said, oh, how they treated me wrong. He wasn't punished for doing wrong. He was just persecuted, and he didn't understand. And now during this time, a lot of things we do not understand. But you know, while he was in prison, Pharaoh had a dream, and God was still with him. And later on, they said, I remember that Hebrew said he interpreted my dream, said he could tell you what that meant in your dream. And Pharaoh was very concerned, so he said, bring me this Hebrew. And Joseph told him that. And in verse 41, it said, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set these over all the land of Egypt. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes of all his servants, because he told him what was going on. Joseph didn't really understand, as we do today, the whole plan of God, but he kept focused on God. He kept living for God. When things are not good, what should we do? You know what? We should keep on. We should never fail to be faithful. We should keep on singing. We should keep on praying, keep on giving, keep on witnessing, keep on submitting ourselves to the Lord. And Joseph told them, said about the 7 years of plenty. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much until he left number, and he couldn't count it anymore, and it was without number. And then he said also after that, so there could be 7 years of famine and starvation. So he said, you plan for that. And they were the famine come, but he didn't see God's bigger plan. And he didn't know till chapter 50 what was going on. But God knew. He had faith and a promise that one day the corn would produce. And he told Pharaoh, Pharaoh put him as the number 2 man. You know, in our life, we always second. We should never want to be above God, you know. But he had a dream, a passion that people would bow down before him. And he never lost his dream and his purpose in life. And it says in 42, God's plan began to unfold. And when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his son, do you not look one upon another? He said, why don't you just stand there and look at one another? He said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. The corn produced in Egypt. Get ye down hither and buy for us from hence, so we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn. And they come to buy corn, and Joseph knew that there would be 7 very good years, and he would know that there would be 7 years of famine, and God promised him that. Yet he didn't fully understand. Even in that time, the people, Pharaoh became very rich. People sold their houses, they sold their cattle, they sold their horses. And then at the end said, we have spent everything and we died. And Joseph still had a promise, what God gave him. He said, I give you this corn seed, and said, you plant it. 4/5 you keep for yourself. Said you feed your family and your little ones. So take care of your family, but 1/5 you bring and you give to Pharaoh. You take this seed and one day it produced, and you would serve Pharaoh. And they all thought a lot of Pharaoh. You know, when the God of the mountain is still God in the valley. When things are good, he's still God. When things are bad, we're still God. Just because we don't understand what was going on. Now we see him, the famed statesman. He moved up to the number 2 position. When his sons, his half-brothers come for corn, you know the story. I'm not going to get into it for time, but he forgave them. And he became the fruitful shade tree. He provided for them. And, you know, he is a foreshadow of Christ. You know, what I'm trying to say, the summary of this is, I'm going to get to the summary that, you know, Psalms 105 said that he was sold as a slave. He was feet bruised in shackles. He was placed in irons. He interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and ruling over Egypt. Like I said, most of Genesis covers Joseph, so it would take weeks to cover the story, but I hope you read it. But it's all about a promise. The Old Testament is all about a promise that God made Abraham in Genesis 12 about him making him a promise, said, and I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thee a great name, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless you, and curse him that curseth you, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. You see, Joseph was honored and he was blessed. And he interpreted dreams of the 7 fat years, of the 7 lean years, but he always had that promise that God said that they would be good years. And even though he didn't understand it, God kept him with him. And he brought his family into wonderful, the most productive land in Egypt. And we see in chapter 41, and Joseph gathered corn like the sand of the sea, and very much without numbering. And all the country, in verse 57 of 41, all countries came into Egypt to buy corn, and also his brethren and his dad, who thought that he was killed, but they lied, when he was thrown into the pit, said that he was dead. But Pharaoh put them in one of the best places he had, up in the Gaza Strip. And it said here that 75 people marched in. This was the beginning of the Hebrew nation. It was 75 people. Now in Genesis it says 60 some, and in Exodus it says 70, but they're counting different people. In 75 is a total amount of Jacob's family, Joseph's family, everybody together, 75 total. And he said here, when you tell Pharaoh what you do for a living, you tell them what you do, because shepherds was abomination to that people. And they put them up in the part of Goshen, and they was productive, and God blessed them there. And it was to settle in the best land, in the land of the Ramsey, it said here. And Joseph placed his father and brethren, and gave them the possession of the land in Egypt, and the best of the land. And Joseph said, here is seed for you, that you shall sow the ground. And also Pharaoh blessed them and gave them more seeds. And he had that promise, and he said, you tell them that ye are shepherds. Said, that's an abomination. And those people separated them. They didn't want to intermarry. They didn't want part of their religion. And Joseph now is over 37 years old. He waited 37 years old. And in this story, I'm trying to say, never be willing not to be patient. Don't never lose your dream. In the Old Testament, we see it unfold. That 75 people that walked in when this time of famine that Joseph didn't understand. The Old Testament is all about a promise to Abraham, about a people who would come and be strong and produce, out of that would come Jesus Christ, and of a place. So 75 people came into this area by Joseph being obedient. And over 2 to 2.5 million came out 400 years later when Moses brought them out. The Old Testament, like I said, all about a promise, a place, and a people. And the New Testament is all about a person. And, it's all about who was like that grain of corn, who was planted, had to go into the ground and die, but on that third day he rose again. See, Joseph didn't understand the plan of God, but he trusted God. He never gave up his passion. He never gave up his plan, his purpose for growing. And even though he didn't understand God's big plan, he did when the corn produced. The corn produced in the good times. It produced, and it built a nation. It built a Jewish nation, all because of this. the Jewish nation went from 75 people to 2 million people or more, and that's where we got our Bible, Jesus Christ. And he didn't really understood it until the corn produced. You know what I'm trying to tell you, even in times like this, we don't understand what's going on. We don't see God's total plan. But God has a plan, he has a purpose, and God don't ever want you to give up your passion. He gave Joseph a dream when he was 17 years old, and it didn't come about till well after he was 37 or 40. And you got to be patient. You got to be trusting in God. You can't lean on your own understanding. It says here, Romans 8:17 and 18, as if children, then heirs, heirs with God and joint heirs with Christ, if so be that we suffer with him, that we should also be glorified with him. A sonship always brings suffering with the Lord. There is a cross to bear. You know, God will bless us if we delight in him. He will give us the desires of our heart, but you have to be patient. You have to go through the seasons of life and let God plan unfold. It says here in verse 18, for I reckon that the suffering of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. You know what? For Joseph being, he didn't understand why he went from the palace, to the pit, to the prison. But God put him in the palace, and now a place of honor in the Word of God. He never gave up his passion, his plan, his purpose, and we shouldn't either. We should keep faithful to God, and we should be willing to be patient. We should never let our dreams dissolve, and we should always look to God. 75 people walked in Goshen in Genesis 47:11. 2 to 2.5 million people walked out, a nation that brought forth our Savior. People kept pure in that until Moses brings them out 400 years later. You know, God will provide. You know, just time of doubt, this time when things doesn't really make sense, you're just going to have to trust in the Lord. And I know a lot of people has dreams, and you think, well, they're on hold and don't understand. It's not wrong to question God, but don't never become bitter. Don't never become to the place where you give up your dreams, your hope, your plans, your purpose in God. Don't never turn your back on God. God has a plan, and one day his plan will unfold, and God will take care of it all. Like everything else, Jesus is the focal point of all this. Joseph didn't understand it, and we might not understand what's going on. But one day the good Lord's going to come, and he's going to take care of it all. God bless you.